Morning, everyone. Today we're going to continue with reading A Mystic Path Less Traveled, a Jungian Psychological Perspective by Dr. Jerry Wright. And we'll also be talking about Religious but Not Religious, Living a Symbolic Life by Jason E. Smith. And it is 8:07 in the East. Do you know where your children are? Jordan Hoggard will not be joining us today because he has moved to Taos, New Mexico, and he promises to do so in the future. But today he's engaged with spreading his father's ashes, and so could not interfere with that, obviously. And so I'll be going it alone, and depending on the YouTube Q&A to push me along. And so without further ado, so please don't hesitate to put your questions on the YouTube chat or your comments. I'm going to press on, though, and I guess I want to start with the last paragraph of what we were reading last week, because this relates to where Jordan Peterson and Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson went wrong. And so I'm going to read this last paragraph of Jerry Wright's journal and then talk about that. Again, what if we related to all others, both human and more than human, with a mystical attitude? While I am not you, neither am I other than you. I am indebted to author and contemplative James Finley for this phrase. With the artificial divisions of species, genders, geographies, borders, and ideologies disappear. Well, obviously, they haven't disappeared so far. Would such an attitude allow us to live as an interconnected, interdependent web of being that both mystical knowledge and scientific knowledge validate? So the point of this paragraph is, this commentary on this paragraph, is that Jordan Peterson and those gentlemen want everything to be in the logos. They want every answer in life to be a rational one. But that simply is not true, and it's not possible. And the churches, organized religions have been obfuscating this issue for a very long time. And so I'm going to explain it a little how I see it. Now, in his last interview, and I'll urge you to look at Carl Sagan's last interview and his last book, and I will put the links to these things in the description of this video. It may take me a little while after we finish before I get it in there. But Carl Sagan was railing against, witches and goblins and that sort of thing in the forest. And the problem is, although the witches and goblins don't exist in the forest for a logical scientific mind like Carl Sagan's, they do exist, and you can experience them. And so Sagan just went off the end of his life still trying to talk to the rational part of society without understanding how logic and logos and eros, how they stick together. And so I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Good morning, Big Cat and James Finley. I don't know James Finley's work. So I just can't really comment on that, but let me I'll just read what was quoted from him. While I am not you, neither am I other than you. And that's, the essence of what we're talking about, that every atom in the universe is connected to every other atom in the universe. And yes, and says, I look tired. Well, I had a big day yesterday, and you should look at the video of the session yesterday. I'm going to talk about it in a little bit after a few more people join us, because it is a barn burner, and it provides us with the skeleton key of how to fix our societies. And I'll tell you about that in a bit. But going back to Carl Sagan, Carl wants everything to be logos. But what I want you to do, and some of you have heard this many times from me, but I want you to look around the room, and everything that is in your room, in the room in which you sit, except human beings and pets and potted plants, everything is created by the logos, everything that you see, because we need engineers and designers and all kinds of logos-oriented people to build things so that you want to buy them. And so, for example, my shirt, I have this nice image of a polo player on it, and obviously it's a polo shirt. And so somebody came up with the idea of what this shirt looks like, made a pattern for it, first spun the thread, then wove the thread into cloth and dyed it so that it's this nice cotton soft material, and all these things, and the softness is an eros thing. Okay, you can't necessarily predict what's going to be soft and what's going to be hard in your life. And so, but everything, we need the logos. That's how we get the logos. Everything that is an object in your room was created by the logos. But on the other side, none of it is alive. There's not a single thing that you're looking at other than other human beings, potted plants, and pets that is alive in your room. Even the computer that you're looking through now, and so on, none of it is alive. So we live our lives in the eros. And it is true that the chaos also exists in the eros, outside of rationality. So this is my little metaphor for the chaos of the universe, my little red ball, and that represents everything in the universe that we cannot control. That's chaos. And the whole purpose of what I'm talking about and what I've been teaching on this YouTube channel for more than 5 years is that we have to learn to step back from the chaos at least once a week and reflect on it and try to figure out how we're going to control it a little better in our lives next week. And that's what the traditional religions have always done for us. And that's what psychotherapists do now. And so, so that's the distinction between logos and eros. So when Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson and Jordan Peterson say everything is in the logos, they're simply wrong. That's an F in human life. And I wrote an article years ago called How Neil deGrasse Tyson and Carl Sagan Missed an Entire Universe. And I also missed how enormous this issue is at that time, because it's really going on 8 billion universes. Each one of us has a universe going on in our psyche, and every one of them is different. So I'm going to go out and get the link to this article so that you can read it. It's one of my pieces. It connects with a lot of. Okay, let's see what I'm gonna go into. I'm gonna share my screen so you can see my YouTube channel first, and I think this is it. I hope it is. Okay, so this is my website that I've been building since 2010. It has over 3,500 articles in it, including about 200 or so from me. But I'm the only curator in this website, so it's I take the responsibility of having all the content here. I'm the one. And so on this website, just to give you a little tour of the website, I have this this thingy that rotator, I guess, on it. And those have the latest articles. And then after, and they have the latest 4 articles. And then after one is pushed off that rotator, then they stay on the front page, and they get pushed farther and farther down the page. And then I have various topics that I'm discussing. One is human rights, one is abuse of women and children, role of women in society, and finally I have a connection to some video at the bottom. And as you see here, I have a flag counter, and as of now, I've had 186 countries visit this website, more than 362,337 page views. It's actually far beyond that, because I have one single article that has 250,000. So somehow that's way undercounting. I haven't been able to figure out why. But then there are other highlighted videos that I have on this lower thing. And then here we have the most read articles. So my most read article is called "The Big Lie in American Politics," and it's got over 250,000 views. Here, I'll just show you. And it's been here since the 25th of October, 2011. And a lot of people don't think that small things make a big difference. But this article and another one by my colleague, Meltem Arikhan, written in the fall of 2011 actually brought in the idea of lying in politics. It's the origin of that idea in the general public's knowledge, and it was influential in defeating Mitt Romney in the 2011 election. And there's actually an article on here called How a Turkish Novelist and an American Executive Influenced Election 2012. And so that worked out well for my team in 2012, but then 4 years later, our former president weaponized that idea. Okay, so if you want to find an article by someone, you can look at featured authors, and you can look at focus issues, and or if you know something about the title of the article, you can put it up here in search, and you can put this website into essentially all the world's languages. Everybody can read this. So if I were to select Danish, for example, so now you have this website in Danish, just so you know, and that can make it easier for you. And so, but beyond the language, I'm going to go back to English because I have to be able to read it to explain what I'm doing here. English. Okay, so here I want to say Neil deGrasse Tyson, and because I know that name is in the title of my story. And let's see, I have this article under several categories so that people can find it on the internet. And I don't remember which version of it has the most hits. Everyone has its own counter. But here's probably the primary one I used. So it's had 33,526 hits. And so it's Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse Tyson missed an entire universe. Now, in defense of them, when I wrote this, I missed the other 8 billion universes in the universe. So this was 6 years ago, and I've evolved since then. And so a lot of I especially liked Carl Sagan 30 years ago when his Cosmos series came out, but he sort of went off the wrong end of the pier toward the end of his life. And here's a video by Neil deGrasse Tyson where he's saying there just isn't anything. There just isn't anything. You have to do everything but logos. And so I'm going to put this link into the YouTube chat so that you have this. All I have to do is find the YouTube chat again. And what has happened? Where is it? Okay, here we go. All right, so Carl Sagan and Neil deGrasse. I think it's, forget whether it's with an E or not. Let's see. Okay, I don't remember. So anyway, it's Neil deGrasse Tyson. Read this article, and I'll give you the link. There it is. Okay, so that's my opinion. It hasn't changed, and I'll give you an example of why they were wrong. Neil deGrasse Tyson at one point talks about the first day that he came to Carl Sagan's office. And Carl Sagan was his teacher during his time at Cornell University. And so Tyson talks about coming to Carl Sagan's door and seeing Carl Sagan's name on the door, and sort of the feeling that he had as he was entering Carl Sagan's door for the first time. And obviously that was the first day of the rest of his life. And the problem he has is that just that explanation, okay, that's logos, that's fine. But if he wanted to actually describe what it was like to be him and be there in front of that office door, looking at that sign with Carl Sagan's name on it, there's just no chance that he could put that in any number of volumes. I mean, to describe everything that went through his mind in that particular numinous moment, he couldn't write it down. Okay, and so that's the Eros, and that's his life. And so he's describing the Eros that he had. It's all well and good to say that was a special moment. Yeah, okay, logos, I got that. But what was it like to be Neil deGrasse Tyson on that day? And that's where he fell down. And so, this is a point that I've been making for half a decade now, and so it's pretty much the bedrock idea here. And so, okay, so now I'm going to come back to your questions because we've gathered a few people. And it says I look very tired. Yes, well, I'm going on 75 years old, and I've now completed 9 of 43 radiation treatments for my prostate cancer. Now, the good news about having prostate cancer is if you catch it early, which I have done, then you can cure it, and it will allow you to go on with your life, and prostate cancer won't kill you. But if you don't get it early enough, it will metastasize, and then it's curtains. And so I have a business partner who had 3 of his uncles die of prostate cancer. And they say that all men die with prostate cancer, but not from it. So when my father had it, that his urologist said to him, well, how long do you want to live? And my father said 30 years. He was 72 at the time. And the urologist said, well, prostate cancer won't get you then. And so I recounted that story to my urologist, and he said, I would probably say the same thing. And so if you catch it early, you're golden, but you will get it almost certainly if you're a man. And if you don't catch it early, it's going to kill you. And so make sure that you have your annual physicals and your blood tests to test for your PSA. And if your PSA is over about 1 in the numerical scale, then you're starting to have a problem, and you have to definitely address it, which I'm doing. It's a bit of a whirligig to manage to get in there to get it done every day. It takes 8 minutes in the linear accelerator, but the preparation for it and getting myself to the hospital, getting myself prepared to the hospital, and getting into the machine takes about 5 hours a day, starting at 6 a.m. in my case. So if I look tired, yeah, okay, well, my body is under assault until August the 13th. But anyway, that's a little side note. Okay, Big Cat says James Finley was a student of Thomas Merton. He left the monastery and became a psychotherapist. He was into Christian mysticism and meditation, wrote a fantastic book on mystic Meister Eckhart. Well, that's interesting. I'll have to look for that when I have a moment, but my life is suddenly filled up with things to do. So I probably won't get to it until later in the year, but that's interesting to know. So, and says logos is just a function in the material world. Maybe no, it's not just a function in the material world. It is a function in the universe, and its counterpoint is energy. Basically, the idea is E equals mc squared. Okay, and Einstein explained it, and I have a great quote here from the Radiance Sutras by Lauren Roche. And in his introduction to this book, which is a wonderful, wonderful book, I love this book, he has this paragraph. The Bhairava Tantra is set as a conversation between the goddess, who is the creative power of the universe, and the god, who is the consciousness that permeates everywhere. For short, they call each other Devi and Bhairava, or Shakti and Shiva. They are lovers and inseparable partners, and one of their favorite places of dwelling is in the human heart. And so Shakti and Shiva, the ancient Hindus had this down 5,000 years ago. They couldn't describe it in formulae or in algorithms, but we still can't describe it in formulae and algorithms. And I'll just read one of the sutras just to give you an example, because it does relate to mysticism and to the ideas we're talking about today. So here it is. This is verses 10 through 12 of the Bhairava Tantra. Elaborate rituals and garish images may be useful in meditation when your mind is whirling with thoughts of sex, money, and power, wandering like an elephant in heat. Go ahead and use these tools, yet know, beating drums and blaring trumpets cannot summon the one who is already present. I am not a collection of incantations known only to experts. I am not a ladder to be climbed, a sequence for piercing energy centers in your body. I am not to be found at the end of a long road. I am right here. Okay, so that goes along with Jerry's dictum that God is not a being, God is being itself. Okay, going on. N says Eros is to feel the world and to desire. Therefore, Logos provides the desire. Well, actually, no. Logos is dead, or it's material, and the clash of opposites may create consciousness, but it doesn't provide the desire. The desire is on the Eros side. Big Cat, I used to live in the Eros, but now am a very bitter cynic and live more in the logos. Well, okay, we all live in the logos because everything that's in our room is logos, and everything. But the reason those things are in your room, whatever they are, including the webcam that you're looking at right now, they were all put there because they were beautiful to you. You wanted them. So that essence of beauty is in the eros. And so so there's nothing physically tangible that's in the eros. The eros is the energy, and the eros is the source of consciousness. But the clashing together of material leads matter to more and more consciousness. And that's a process that's been going on for 3.8 billion years. And at some point, boop, there was just enough of everything that life was created originally. And that was about 3.5 billion years ago. And ever since then, our ancestors have been alive and they have led to us. So all of us have ancestors going back to single-celled organisms, and all of those organisms did two things successfully, which is why we're having this conversation. They survived until they reproduced. They survived until they reproduced. Every one of your ancestors did that all the way back to the beginning of life. And that's a mystery. Science can't explain it. They can describe it. They can say things like, well, life reproduces itself. Well, okay, yeah, life reproduces itself. That's an observation. And, and life may have come from lightning in stagnant ponds on the edge of the ocean. Not so much, because life came from the ocean. So anyway, so you can't live only in the logos. Everything that's in the logos is dead. You have to bring eros into your life. J. John says, is there a study group in Ojai, California? Well, I'm sure there is a study group in Ojai, California, but it's no doubt related to Krishnamurti, who lived out his life in Ojai. Well, his thinking was very profound. We've even taken his thinking farther than that. But Krishnamurti is a wonderfully interesting individual, because when he was 10 years old, he was in Madras, India, which is now Chennai in Indian language. And so now we respectfully call it Chennai, but even in my lifetime, it was called Madras. And he was on the beach with his 8-year-old brother one day, and Annie Besant, I'm pretty sure it was Annie Besant, who was a theosophist, saw him on the beach, and she saw this incredible aura around him. And it was just light that was lighting up around him. And so she had an intuition to select him as the next Messiah. And that's what she did. And so if you want to know what an aura is, it's light, and it's sort of like the edge that is between my head and the picture behind me. And so it changes, it moves around like as I move my head, the virtual background doesn't quite keep up. And so you see that dark space around my head. That's a phenomenon of the camera and the lack of perfection in the virtual background technology. But if you see light around someone's head, and you can actually see that around everybody's head, then that's an aura. And if you haven't ever seen an aura, do the following practice. Simply put your fingers like this across from one another and move them up and down, like as I'm doing here. And what you will see, put it against a solid background, either black or white, it doesn't matter. But just do this, and you will see a beam of light that goes from one finger to the other between your hands. That's an aura, okay? And once you see that, if you've never seen it, you'll be able to remember what an aurora or an aura is for the rest of your life. But if you haven't seen it, you should try to relax and see it, because that's the source of the idea of halos, among other things, which appear in medieval paintings, blah, blah, blah. And obviously around the heads of Christ and Mary, Mother of God. And so what those painters were seeing or depicting was auras. And I think even John the Baptist described the aura around Christ's head at the time that Christ was baptized. So anyway, that's a real thing. Auras are a real thing. They're not airy-fairy. They are energy between the parts of your body or between people. And some people have bigger auras than others, but pretty much everybody has one. And if you find someone that's particularly spiritual and they have a white background behind their head, even in a church or in a conference, you'll see this light around them. And sometimes people see color, and that's an aura. It's what helium atoms do, given 13.8 billion years of development. And so it's an energy field around every piece of matter, actually. Let's see. So anyway, going back to Krishnamurti for a minute. So Annie Besant educated Krishnamurti. She sent him to Cambridge, got him very highly educated. And on his 33rd birthday, so 23 years after he was discovered, at the International Convention of Theosophists, she was going to officially anoint him as the new Messiah, as the next Messiah. And, it was a big deal, big convention of Theosophists. It was in Holland, and it was in the 1930s, about 1934, I suppose. And Krishnamurti got up to speak after this anointment, and he said, I'm not anybody's Messiah. I'm just a man. I don't want followers. None of this is true. I don't have any special wisdom, so just forget about it. And the result of that was that people followed him as the new Messiah for the rest of his life. He could never get away from it. I think he finally found some peace in Ojai, and that's where he was during the war. But there's a wonderful book called Krishnamurti, 100 Years, I think, or 100 Years of Krishnamurti, whatever it is. And that's a terrific book. I recommend you read it. But that's all I know about Ojai. And I don't know about any Carl Jung groups in Ojai, but they're everywhere. So they're around. Big Cat says Sagan also wasn't a very good scientist either, but he was a great communicating science to the public. I concur. And says, I don't feel these people, Tyson and Sagan. And Big Cat says, so Big Cat says he can easily go between the logos and the eros. And Big Cat said the ancient Hindu text somehow managed to combine the eros and logos. And I've given an example of that by reading from the Radiant Sutras. And the Radiant Sutras are Lauren Roche's translation into English of the Bharava Tantra. And so I urge you to read it. It's wonderfully translated and interpreted by Lauren Roche. And it's all about the dance between logos and eros, or between matter and energy, however you want to put it, comes down to E equals mc squared in Einstein's theory. So good morning, Annette. Nice to see you today. I hope you're well. Krishnamurti summed up his teachings in one phrase: I don't mind what happens. Okay, well, what happens, happens. I suppose that's true. But we might be able to control the essence of the chaos of the universe if we know a few things. And so therefore, finish your high school, go to college, get a graduate degree if you can, and then go out and make as many mistakes as you can, as fast as you can, and then you will become wise. Okay, that's the way it works. And I'm the living proof of that. Big Cat. Okay, all right. So here's, so that was just a finish up of last week's session, because I did want to draw your attention to my perspective about Jordan Peterson, Carl Sagan, and Neil deGrasse Tyson in conjunction with what Jerry had said. So Jerry's next passage is, for more than 13 billion years, there existed what we have named the natural world. When our species came online, so to speak, we gave names to our experiences of that numinous world. In that way, or in this way, we created all of our gods and goddesses, deities and devils, and religions. Now we are tasked with being responsible channels or conduits of those powers and presences that we discovered and named. This is what it means to be human, to be responsible channels of the numinous powers and presences in the cosmos. In this way, we accept our role as co-creators of the future. It is a tall order, both our glory and our burden. Okay, so yes, the point is, God is not a being, God is being itself. And we represent the consciousness of God, because, notwithstanding the fact that other creatures have the five senses, we're the only ones that can figure it out well enough so that we can control the earth if we want to. And Dr. Jung very much thought that we are the consciousness of God, quote unquote. And he came to that insight on Mount Elgon in Africa. I'm not exactly sure what country. And he went up, climbed up away from his group on the mountain, and he's looking out over this sea of herds of animals, and they're springboks and elephants and giraffes and tigers and lions, etc. And they're just moving along like a sea in front of him. And it occurred to him that it was as if he had created them, which of course he didn't, but but he had that insight. And then he had his aha moment in understanding that it was a pretty obtuse, unconscious God that created all those species, because it took hundreds of millions of years for each one of those species to develop. And people differ on how long it's taken human beings to differ, but human beings, we can't find an example of a human being going back, I think, further than 7 million years. It might be 4 million years. I know the skeletal head, which is a woman that's been defined as Lucy. She was considered to be the first human at one point. I think they've found other remains since then. And they all these very early humans appeared in the Aldvai Gorge of, I think it's Kenya. And so from those creatures that are 4 million years old, we evolved and spread out across the world. So we're all different in some senses because we evolved other characteristics in ourselves, just as the coronavirus is doing that now. But we're all the same in another sense. So every oak tree is an oak tree. So it meets certain correct characteristics of something called a tree. But we can always recognize an oak tree if we know the characteristics of oak trees, what their leaves look like, and so on. But still, every oak tree has a different environment wherever it is in the world, and it develops in different ways. And so it is with us. That's individuation. That's how you identify what you were meant to be in life. And so that's fundamental to Jungian psychology. So Big Cat says, Schopenhauer has some choice words to describe the unconscious God that created this world of suffering. Well, Jung had some choice words too, but he said it's been millions of years of devouring and begetting, and we're still doing it, because everything that you purchase in the grocery store for your dinner table or your breakfast table, every single thing, it was once alive in some way. And so all life lives on other life, and we are part of that too. and whatever our remains are at the end of our life will go back into the giant maw of creation and become something else. So obviously we are incarnated in that way. If we're put in a casket, then a good chance is that that the atoms in our body will become worms. And if instead we have ourselves cremated, then our ashes will fertilize the earth and pollute the atmosphere, etc. So it's all pretty ugly if you think about it in those terms, but that's where we are. Okay, now I wanted to, and let's see, I had, I'm sort of treating this this session on Sunday mornings as a Q&A session for everything I do now. And so I'm doing my best to pay attention to the YouTube chat. If I get other panelists to join me, I would love to have other panelists join me, including anybody that's hearing this right now. But if you want to just lurk and watch me on the screen, that's fine also. But remember my dictum: as long as you're hiding behind a pseudonym, with the exception of somebody like Justin Case, who Justin Case regularly identifies what his real name is. And, I go around YouTube and respond in the name of this YouTube channel, Jungian Psychology Reading Group. But when I do that, everybody knows that it's my name, it's my pseudonym, and so they know who I am. But if you're literally hiding behind a handle, then you're not yet individuated. That's what I would say. If you're hiding behind a persona, the persona is not the real you, and so you haven't. If you feel you need to do that, it probably, by definition, means that you haven't individuated, and you're not in the process. But I'm not an expert on these things. I'm just offering my opinion. But what we have to do is face who we really are and what we were brought to this planet to do. And that's it's a very difficult process. It requires maturity. And so this is partially why Dr. Jung didn't even bother with people in the first half of life, because the first 21 years, let's say, you're learning how to be a human being. You're learning how to get across the street and eat and manage your bowels and that sort of thing. And so that's your childhood and youth. But then when you reach your maturity, then you have to do the necessary things to basically propagate the species, reproduce. Those are the activities of the early adulthood life, starting, from puberty, actually. But it's better if you do it when you've reached maturity, so you make the right decisions. One of my sons-in-law married my daughter when he was 40, and he's an Irishman, and it's very common for Irishmen to not marry until they're 40. And my daughter at the time was 35, and she had simply said until she was 35 to about all her boyfriends, no, he's not good enough. And I don't want to spend my life with this person, and I don't want to bring a child into the world that's a carbon copy of this person. And so she just kept trying different boyfriends, but finding them not good enough. So it was only when she met her current husband, the Irishman, who is a fine man, by the way, but he was the one that was good enough. And so now they have three children, twins. They had twins first, a boy and a girl, and now they have another daughter. So they have sort of the $1 million family, but they have the maturity to make it happen. Let's see. Yeah, Danny Van Hex says most people are cremated in Europe. Yeah, and on the other hand, in Hong Kong, if you buy a gravesite, you get it for 7 years. So you get buried. You can be buried in that gravesite for 7 years, and then they dig you up and put you in the oven. And anyway, and so just depends on what floats your boat on that. The fire says, in Poland, it is possible to get cremated. Some years ago, they were still against it in the church. Okay, why would the church care, really? And he says, I asked the I Ching lately what I should do meaningful in my life. Well, I Ching is a good way to find out, because I Ching is a way of connecting yourself to your unconscious. And he says, Belgium used to be a Catholic nation, but few people still go to church now. We've already gone secular for decades. Yeah, and so think of it this way. That building that collapsed in Florida, when you create something, okay, it's shiny new, but it immediately starts to deteriorate. Everything does. And so by 3 years ago, the engineer was saying there's urgent need to fix this building. And probably they couldn't get the owner's organization to agree to spend the money to fix the building. And the foundation of that building was crumbling. And that's what's been happening in the Catholic Church for 500 years, at least, or maybe 600, depending on how you count, at least since Galileo, and probably before that, because there were scientists before Galileo. Galileo is notable because he was taken up before the Inquisition, and he had to swear on a stack of Bibles on one Bible, I presume, but he had to swear on a Bible that the earth is the center of the universe. So that's how good the Catholic Church's science has been over the years. But anyway, since Galileo's time, certainly, the Catholic Church has been rotting out at its foundations. like all religions, have been rotting out at their foundations because everything, goes to corruption eventually, everything. Um, and so then the building collapsed, and now they can't find anybody. Well, why is that? They can't find any remains or survivors. I think they found a couple of body parts, and one corpse, but they're not going to find anybody, because in a collapse like that, what happened is that everything in that building was atomized immediately. So what I would expect is they may find a few body parts in various locations that have cavities in that collapse, but largely they're not going to find people's remains. And the reason is that they were instantly turned into molecules. And so it's a good way to go, I suppose, because you're sound asleep. And if you even heard the rumble or felt the crisis in an instant, in less than a second, not only do you not exist, but nothing about your body, it still exists. And that happened in, I guess, a total of 11 seconds. So I suppose some people could have awakened and realized that they were in a crisis, but probably not even, probably didn't wake up even enough to fully realize what was happening. And then all of a sudden, there wasn't anything to realize. And so that's what I guess. And so I'm not saying that the Catholic Church will go away. We need the Catholic Church, and we need all religions, because they were early forms of mental health therapy, let's say, and they provide a service in our society. And so societies can't just turn their back on them. That's one point on which I don't agree with Jerry Wright. Jerry has the position that we should just turn our backs on the churches and walk away. And I do not agree with him on that. I think that they're very useful. All religions are very useful for educating our young and bringing them along and maintaining their mental health without always bringing in a shrink. And so they're useful in naturally evolved psychotherapy. But in the end, you have to reach a certain level of maturity and awareness and consciousness that you can make a judgment whether that's still helpful to you or not. I know when I was 30 years old and I was a deacon in the Reformed Church, even at that time, I had my doubts, and the reason I joined that church and became a deacon was I felt that was what I should do in order to build up my law practice, which is a sensible enough thing to do. But by that time, and that was 45 years ago, I had serious doubts, and I remember asking the pastor about what's his definition of God. What do you mean by God? And this young pastor didn't have a clue. He was stumped the stars. He just couldn't say what God was. And I kept going to church all through my Japan time, 5 years in Japan, because I had young children and so on. But I didn't understand how all this fits together at that time. And so nowadays I go to weddings and funerals, and I even put on my uniform sometimes if it's a Marine or naval officer that's getting married or who's being buried. I will put on my uniform. And that's to honor that individual. But I don't have to believe I know, like Dr. Jung says. Okay. So because this, yeah, Fire says, let's see, I missed a few things here. Yeah, okay, so Fire says, question asked, could you please turn off the CGI generated picture behind you? It is very low quality, cutting your head around, and I can't watch it without getting annoyed by this bad AI. There is something stopping, suppressing, and that there will be a person that will show me the way. I could be walking alongside this person. So hopefully looking forward. Okay, fair enough. That is, as Fire is pointing out, it's a part of a persona, right? And so I will eliminate my persona. And this is me in my environment. And I have nothing to hide. Over my right shoulder here is a Japanese koto. My wife went to Japan for 3 years right after college. And among other things, she became a professional grade koto player. And when she left, her friends and students put their money together and bought her that koto. At this point in our lives, that koto is a shadow we carry around because my wife can no longer get down on the floor and play it, which is the position you have to get into to play a koto. And so she hasn't played it for me in about 30 years, probably. Well, let's see. Yeah, about 30 years. And so if you want anyone, if you know anybody that wants a koto, a professional grade koto, please let us know, because we would like to gift it to that person if they want to study. And so this is my official announcement and offer. We've been trying to give it away for 5 years or so, and even the koto societies around the place don't take us up on it. So anyway, but anyway, this is my wife's side of the office and her iMac, and over here is her shrine. My wife is a Buddhist teacher, but not ordained. She completed a 3-year retreat in Tibetan Buddhism, which is basically divinity school for Tibetan Buddhists, but she did not take ordination because, thankfully, she's married to me. And Dr. Jung thought that Tibetan Buddhism was the one tradition that pretty much followed his psychology the best. And if you watch the BBC documentary with Dr. Jung being questioned, there's a scene in there where he's showing the interviewer his house, and you'll see he has 2 large Tibetan tankas on his walls. And so he was very well versed in Tibetan Buddhism. And in fact, he wrote the introduction to the 1928 English translation of the Tibetan Book of the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It was first translated about then, and he wrote the introduction to it. And one Christmas time, over there on that shelf is first edition of that book, which I gave my wife for Christmas one year. So, and then over here, I have my legal work, which is my logos work, which relates to a company in Malaysia. And on top of it, as you see, I have alchemy and mysticism and a bunch of other Jung books. And also I have the eternal moment there, as you all know about. So just so you know. So hopefully we've done away with the problem of my persona, and I agree with you. You've given me an aha moment. You're right. That was a persona, and I'm not going to express that any further. Fire says, I opened the I Ching because of yesterday's lecture. Well, terrific. The I Ching is like the Tarot. It's sort of a intermediary between a awake human being and the mystery, and so it's a low res way of getting into some of these psychological ideas, as is the Tarot, which is why we do a weekly session on the Tarot. It's a way to talk about things that are big picture psychological issues, and so it's a divination technique. And what it does is it can tell you some of the things that are, let's say, complexes or sore spots in your psyche. So I can walk into an auditorium with 1,000 people present, throw the Tarot cards across the floor, and do a reading directly off the floor with no layout, which is often used by Tarot readers. And everyone in the room will synchronistically get hit by something that I say. And so at the lowest resolution, that's handled by conversation, by coffee clutches, by all the men in the Middle East that are sitting out in front of coffee shops, and all the women in the world who get together for coffee or tea during the day while their husbands are away at work or whatever it is. All those things are sort of low res ways of managing your psychological state. Even partying is in that category, or going to the movies is in that category, because you need a break from all the crises and chaos of the world, and so partying serves that function. So it's just your taste about how you want to do that, but a little bit higher resolution way of getting in touch with your unconscious is by having a Tarot reading, and understanding the Tarot as a roadmap for life, which is the way we're teaching it now. We're not doing readings per se. I did that back in 1718, and there's a series on how to read the Tarot, but now we're talking about how each card has certain psychological meanings, basically. And we've done, I think, 40 sessions on that topic, each one 2 hours long or more, and we're going to continue on. And so the I Ching falls in that category. Um, also reading tea leaves and all those sorts of divination. Now I'm suffering from an old man's issue, so I'm going to cloak myself for a moment. I'll be right back. Okay, so one of the penalties for having a full and rich life is that the final stages are are not that pretty sometimes. Anyway, that's life. Fire says, where was it? I believe the future of spirituality and religion is something of the shape of decentralized religion, which will be caused by a psychedelic revolution where everyone have access to the mystical realm. And Fire, you are dead wrong on that one, because, or partially right, I would say. You're right in the sense that it will be decentralized religion, because basically we'll develop our own religions, each one of us. And so, you'll pick from the smorgasbord of what things you can accept and what things you can't accept through your life, and that will be your personal religion. So it's decentralized in that sense, but the the future is not about the psychedelic revolution, because if you're doing it artificially, first of all, using psychedelics, you're putting your own life at risk. In the United States, haven't looked at a statistic recently, but in 2017, we killed 72,000 people from drug overdoses. And so a lot of folks get go down that path that you're talking about right now. They get connected to the unconscious and to numinous experiences, but then they get hooked and they die early. The same is true of, artists or writers who lose the flow, and so they have writer's block or painter's block. And when that happens, sometimes they think that they can get back to that place with alcohol or drugs, and instead it kills them. So my suggestion is get high on life. And if you want to be immortal, you better do it in this lifetime. And so I have no idea how long these videos will last in hyperspace, but certainly they will outlive me by maybe hundreds of years. And I guess it just depends on what happens to YouTube. But even so, lots of people have downloaded things that I've said. And so my videos will exist on people's iPhones, bada bee, bada ba. And even if the videos don't still exist at some point, just the teachings coming out to you come out and my energy waves, and they impact you, and therefore they impact all of humanity. And that's true of anybody that says anything that's noteworthy. And so if you want to be immortal, you have to either do something like Jesus Christ, or you have to write a 20-volume collected works like C.G. Jung, something like that. Those people are certainly immortal, and their spirit lives within us to this day. We're talking about them right now, so there's no doubt that their spirit is still alive and well. And so, but you get one lifetime to do it. And you're not going to create anything further. When you're dead, you don't know you're dead. But when you're stupid, it works the same way. And so, all of us have to wake up and smell the roses, and don't count on some Geppetto entity up there in the sky to just draw you up to heaven, and then everything will be hunky-dory. You wonder about those Muslim suicide bombers who were promised 72 virgins in heaven. Were they disappointed when they found themselves not on earth? Because my suspicion is they didn't find 72 virgins. And that's the way it is. Some people are stupid. And Estelle says she loves performance art. That's wonderful, and I agree with that. And we're going to, next summer in our confluence, we're going to be doing some performance art. And it's a very important form of art and creativity. And so, that too is going to become somewhat immortal. It already is, but because I've been mentioning it, but after we do it, we're going to have a documentary of it. So that will exist out in hyperspace for a long while. And says, came across a book, not read it yet, Julian James, The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind, on Amazon. Very interesting. Yeah, I'm sure it is. The best book of that kind is Eric Neumann's book, The Origins and Source of Consciousness. I think that's what the name is. I never get these names quite right. The Origins and History of Consciousness by Eric Neumann. And it's not a thin book. It's got a lot of ideas in it. And so I highly recommend that. And Eric Neumann wrote that book during World War II. He had fled Germany and gone to Israel in 1934, and then he was cut off from the Jungian community for 5 years during the war, and they couldn't pass letters back and forth and so on. So he wrote that book and came back, and he wanted it to be published as the first publication of the C.G. Jung Institute, and Dr. Jung couldn't manage it because it was so big it would suck all the air out of the room, and they wanted to publish shorter books, things like this, that are shorter and on a certain point. And so, but Dr. Jung helped him get it published by a different Swiss publisher. And so anyway, but if Julian James has got a good book, by all means, that's a step in the process. This is really keeping up with you all. Phil Anderson says Jung speaks against the psychedelics, saying that everyday life and the unconscious provides plenty of contents to sift through. Absolutely true. And yeah, and it's usually not deadly, I would say. Just beware of unearned wisdom. And if you take a pill to find your wisdom, that's unearned, and you won't, in the end, it can easily kill you. So Fire says there was called the Good Friday experiment, in which people studying to be priests took LSD and experienced the mystical experience. Very interesting. 9 out of 10 of them. There were 20 in all. 10 took a placebo. Okay, what people were experimenting with these things years ago, and I don't highly recommend it. Justin has been writing since 1986, never had a writer's block. Well, yeah, I mean, if you understand these things and where this flow comes from and how it comes, there's no reason to have writer's block. And so, last week, Bob Manus was talking about it. What is it? And so, for example, when I met my first wife when I met my second wife online, we were the first couple to meet online and marry. As far as I know, nobody has ever challenged that claim. We met on August the 22nd, 1985, 10 years before the World Wide Web got going, on a email network. And we met because I issued one of the first spams, which was on this email network called The Source. You could put 7 interests. And then you could search on that. So I did a search on entrepreneurship, and there were 35 people on The Source that had entrepreneurship as an interest, and I got one response, and that was from the woman who's been my wife for the last 35 years. And so once that email exchange began, in 4 months, we basically wrote a book between us. But by the end of the 4 months, I knew my wife better than I knew my wife of 17 years. And so my new wife was it. She was the one. And so I packed my bags, and in the morning of January the 2nd, 1986, I left my first wife. In the evening of January the 6th or 2nd, 1986, I moved in with my second wife and have never looked back. And she was it. She was the one. And so I have 3 beautiful daughters who have accepted my second wife as a part of their lives. And so it's all worked out in the greater scheme of things. But you can also make mistakes. So I have been experimenting around with my life to try to figure out what it is, what my psyche wants to do for a long while. And in 1993, my psyche told me I wanted to write a novel. And so I did that. And so I learned how to get into that space for writing a novel. But after I wrote the novel, it had, and that was archetypal possession, by the way. And after I wrote it, it contained passages of pornography, or if we want to be demure about it, we can call it eroticism. And it was the story of the first woman prime minister of Japan from age 15 to age 75. And everything in that novel is true in the sense that everything that happens in that novel either happened to me or someone I know intimately. But except for the first woman prime minister of Japan, there's never been such a person yet. There will be, and maybe very soon now. But the reason I say that is the mayor of Tokyo is now a woman. But anyway, when I finished the novel, I didn't write any more novels. And at the same time, I was writing poetry. And after I finished my poetry book, I didn't write any more poetry, essentially. And the reason was that that was not it. And so then my next experiment was in painting. I still had an urge to do something. Myself was telling me, go paint. So I started to paint, and I painted for about 10 years. And in 2005, I had 3 art shows that were successful shows, including one in Greenwich Village, Soho. And after that show, I didn't touch a toothbrush for 14 years. And because that was not it either. And it's only since 2010 when I started to do the website, and then in 2016 started to do this YouTube channel, that I found what is it for me. And this is my call. This is what I've been called to do. And so that's why I've just been continuously doing it since 2010. And so that's what it is for me. But you'll have your own. And so if you're interested in my writings, they are on, oh shoot, I just hid the Let's see. Okay, if you're interested in my writings that are under my pen name, this is my pen name. And so you can find it. The two writings are Mako, Memoirs of a Woman, and Seduction for the Soul. Okay, so those were my two books in 1993, but I just never went back to them. And now in the fullness of time, I just recognized that they weren't it for me. And so I found the thing that I was meant to do, and this is it. So here I am. I get up every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. and do a lot of other things because it energizes me to do it. Yeah, Phil says most people aren't able to integrate into earthly reality. Well, that's what we're trying to help people do by this YouTube channel. The fire says it is very, very important to do after the ceremony the psychological integration of these profound experiences. You need to do it with an experienced psychologist and spiritual guide. I'm not a mental health professional, and I know that there are experiments going on at Johns Hopkins and other places about use of psychedelics to help people in mental health crises. And I just don't know enough about those, but what I would say for sure is that you should be doing it with an experienced psychologist or spiritual guide. And I don't think most people can handle that on their own. And Justin Gates says he wrote some erotica too. Okay. Well, we're men, and all men have that deep inside us, and women do too. Every woman that ever told me what her reaction to my book was, they loved it. And so these two books are under that pen name, and they are only available on Kindle. They're only available on Kindle. Bill says, I agree. However, most folks aren't able to integrate that into earthly reality. And you're playing with fire. They spend their entire lives trying to understand the experience. It's like having all the answers and no questions to link to them. Yeah, very well said. Unearned wisdom, right? So Phil says, I like how some Swiss analysts are using it as a synonym for the self. And yeah, I agree. That's what it is. And I hadn't heard it used in that way quite until I read Bob Manus's book, but I do see that that's true. And moxification, would obsession with an erotic archetype or archetypal possession, i.e., you are obsessed with fantasy or being a slave or master or other BDSM role. Yeah, I mean, I was certainly possessed by my anima during the time I was writing Mako. And the thing about an archetype is archetypes are like records on the jukebox. They're quite quiescent most of the time, but if you pay the money and put in their number, when they start to play, they don't stop. They never stop. And so um, until they're finished playing. And so in my case, I would say when that novel was completed, um, I was released from that possession. And when that poetry book was completed, I was released from that obsession. And when I'd had those 3 art shows, it wasn't that I couldn't sell art, I could, but that wasn't it for me. That was an experiment, which I stuck to for 10 years. But, as an avocation, all these things are my avocations. And so they're a way to maintain my mental health. That's what I use them for, including this. And so, yeah, just in case says, I don't see the point of taking it in relation to long-term individuation. Well, it wouldn't get you to individuation in any case. It'd say, well, here's gold out here. Now, now start digging. Well, Troy, what's archetypal possession? Well, let's say that Mako wouldn't let me sleep after 6 a.m. every morning until I had written 800 to 1,000 words in that novel. And that possession drove me for 8 months. As soon as the novel was completed and the story was told, then it left me. But until I told the whole story, it was had me by the neck. And so was it. Okay, I'm going to skip your comment. Wait a minute, where is it? Okay, so Maxification says, would obsession with an erotic archetype be archetypal possession? Yes. You are obsessed with a fantasy of being slave or master or other BDSM role. Yes. Lots of people experiment with those things. And, a lot of them are quite happy with it too. And so I have a dear friend who is a sex therapist, and she used to live here in my community, and she certainly experienced those things in her practice quite a lot. So thank you, Phil. I appreciate your comment. Just in case when trying. Okay, I'm just not going to take comments that relate to artificial means, including LSD. So I'm just going to leave that one aside. Um, okay, I just can't keep up with the chat. at the moment, and I'm just doing my best to read them all. Okay, Fire says the MAPS organization is now recruiting psychologists to train them to work with psychedelics. With upcoming years, they will be incorporated in our societies, I believe. Well, that may be true, but I'm not a mental health professional. I know nothing about the research, and so I'm not going to talk about that. Please go somewhere else, everybody that wants to know more about it. Yeah, lack of knowledge and stupidity kills people. That's quite correct. We saw that on January the 6th in my country. And well, Phil said, all these justifications for trying psychedelics, like it gets you out of nihilism, those are just personal justifications. And, we're killing tens of thousands of young people just in my country every year with psychedelics because people don't approach it in the right way. And so, please just stop talking about psychedelics on this channel. I really would appreciate it. Yeah, the Fire, please just stop it, because whatever your justifications are, you're going to mislead. You're going to mislead 10 people into making the wrong assumptions because they're not mature enough to make the right assumptions. And I will go right back to Jordan Peterson. He's, I agree with him 99.5% of the time, but he's the poster boy for what I'm talking about, because he had been a 25-year practicing clinical psychologist, and he assumed that he wouldn't get addicted if he took a certain drug. I'm not even going to talk about it, but he ended up nearly dying. It took him 1.5 years to get back to something similar to normal, which is where he is now. But if a professional like that can make a mistake like that, then any stupid college or high school student can make much bigger mistakes. And so I really don't want to talk about psychedelics on this channel. And if you continue to do it, I'm going to block you from the channel. I'm sorry. I have to be very serious about that. I've lost 5 people in my immediate circle of family and friends to psychedelics, and I've lost 5 people in my immediate family and friends to COVID. And so both of them are extremely serious, and I don't agree to discuss that here, not at all. Yeah, thank you, Big Cat. I appreciate that. Okay, Fire says nobody is killing anyone with psychedelics, and don't spread that lie. They're hurtful, and the Fire, I simply don't know enough about artificial drugs of any kind, or even natural drugs like opium, to discuss it. And this, whatever your last comment was, that's the last comment you're going to make on this channel. If you make one more, you will be blocked. yeah, if you want to talk about that stuff, go start your own YouTube channel, honestly. Because I think it's misleading young people in a very, very dangerous way to provide them with justifications for taking drugs. Yeah, and no, I'm not going to read the information about it on the website maps. That's the last time it gets mentioned here. And I'm 75 years old. I have prostate cancer. I'm not in the business of educating myself anymore. I have a JD degree, an MBA degree, and a BA, and I've got 50 years of life experience, 55 years of life experience. And don't tell me what I need to do to get educated. I'm educated. If you want to hear what I have to say, please come to this channel. But you're not selling drugs of any kind here. I'm not a mental health professional, and I'm not a psychologist. I've never taken a course in psychology. Everything I've learned has been by my own self-study. And so that is not a topic that's appropriate on this channel. And I very much appreciate some of my longer term followers here for helping me to make sure that's true. And, and I also, you're talking about alcohol abuse. My grandfather was an alcoholic, and he had a stroke when he was 57, and he died at age 68. So, and I've had plenty of experience with ugly alcoholics in my lifetime. I don't have time to go into it here, and we only have 2 minutes left in this session, so I'm not going to, in any case, I'm not going to go into that. But I have no time for alcoholism either. If you have an addiction to alcohol or drugs, please find a 12-step program somewhere. That's the best I can do to advise you. And, or find a mental health professional. I'm sorry to get irritated, but some of this has gotten under my skin. And I urge everyone to who monitors the chat in these discussions to help me keep that sort of discussion off this channel. I'm not saying it's not a valid discussion. It may well be, but please take it to some other channel. Okay, so Tony says, what got you interested in studying Carl Jung? Okay, so that's a fair question. I will answer that one. And this will be the last question because my voice is dying. Goethe said at the end of Faust that the anima hithers us along. Okay, the anima is doing things to make us see kind of what we should do next. If you're a man, if you're a woman, it's animus. But even women have some anima because we both have male and female, masculine and feminine traits in our psyches. And so the anima hithers us along. It says, this is next, this is next, this is next. You could say it's yourself telling you what to do. That's, also a sort of a valid way to interpret it, because the anima is basically a contact lens that sits on the surface of the self. So the anima hithers us along. And so in 1987, I was working as a professor of finance at the University of Maryland. And one of my fellow professors was a brand newly minted PhD, a beautiful woman. And she was about 30 then. And one day at lunch, she asked me whether I ever knew anything about the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And I hadn't heard of it at that time. That was 1987. And I was just reaching senior ranks in the U.S. Marine Corps. And so from that lunch, for the next 10 days, I had her train me over lunch in the Myers-Briggs. I thought it was quite interesting. And she said it was based on the work of Carl Jung. And then what happened was that during the next 2 years in my reserve duty in the Marine Corps, I went to 5 senior schools in the U.S. military. I went to the Naval War College, the National War College, the Industrial College of the Armed Forces, Command and Staff College, and a civilian school that is mandatory for all newly selected brigadier generals in the Army, called the Center for Creative Leadership at Greensboro, North Carolina. And in every one of those schools, keep in mind that a reservist serves just a 2-week training, 2 weeks every year. And so those schools came as part of those trainings. And in every one of those schools, they have 10 business days basically to train you in whatever they're going to train you in your reserve active duty. And in every one of those schools, they spent 1 day out of the 10 training us on the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And it's extremely important for senior level military planning. I'm not going to go into it now, but I have covered it in, I think in lecture 3 of my first year. So you can find it in playlist JRG for Young Reading Group 1. That means the first year I was doing this. And so you can find that that lecture there. It was lecture number 3. And I think it's something like Where to Start in Jungian Psychology. And so I described this more there. But so for that sort of 3-year period until 1990, I had a lot of exposure to the Myers-Briggs. And then from that, in 1990, I was walking through a bookstore on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and I came up on a Jung book, which is Man and His Symbols, the hardbound book. I pulled it off the shelf and I saw that it looked interesting, so I took it home with me. And over the next year of 1990, I read it cover to cover to my wife as we were going to sleep at night. So every night I would read her 2 or 3 pages, and then we would go to sleep and sleep on it. And at the end of the year, we felt that we had had a year of psychotherapy. We both felt that from reading that book very slowly, and it maybe helped to be reading it just before we went to sleep. I don't know, but anyway, that's how I got started. And then in 1992, Clarissa Pinkola Estes, who's a famous Jungian analyst, wrote a book called Women Who Run with the Wolves. And it was a bestseller. And so my mother gave that book to my wife for Christmas. And I picked it up. And after I read a couple pages of it, I told Debbie, you can't have it back. I need to finish this. And so in in 2 days. In 2 days, I read the entire book, and it was from that book that the inspiration for Mako came. So that's basically how I got started. And I didn't really read Dr. Jung's work directly, with the exception of Man and the Symbols. I didn't read his collected works until 2005, and the reason was that I was not then, nor have I ever been interested in clinical psychotherapy. Can't think of anything worse than living your life having 6 or 8 people a day coming in and going down into their deep unconscious, where you have to take your unconscious too, and rooting around in there and then coming out 6 or 8 times a day. I can't think of a worse thing for me to do. It just was a bad idea for me. And mind you, I also left the law in 1979 after studying law for 3 years and practicing law for 5, and realizing that that wasn't it. And so I just moved on. And so that's how I got started. And actually, I did a whole 2-hour session on this recently, so you can find that. You can find that in the YouTube channel. Yeah, moxification says it gets under your skin. It's understandable given your experience and helpful to hear why you have anti-drug stance regarding youth. Many high school kids now preach psychedelics and use and will suffer. Absolutely. That's the psychotherapist's full employment fact. Yeah, and says, I understand Skip Fire has a passion and this is not the place for it. Yep, I'm sorry, but I have to be fastidious about protecting this YouTube channel from any appearance that in any way I'm a mental health professional. I make no such claim. I never have made such a claim. And, some of these mental health techniques, I'm not saying they aren't usable in certain circumstances, but I know what I know. And so I just have to stay away from those topics. So I'm going to wrap up now because my voice has deserted me, and I've been in a 2-hour long soliloquy. So I'll see you next week, and thank you for joining me today.